Does God exist? According to Boethius. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and that's the first question we're posing our new philosopher for the second half of this second season. Before we get into the passages themselves, let's go over a brief background of Boethius' life and ultimate fate. Boethius was a Roman philosopher born in 480 and lived until his brutal execution in 524. His family had always been involved in politics, and in 510, he became a trusted advisor. Afterwards, he was allegedly involved in some type of conspiracy, which led to him being imprisoned. While there, he wrote his final work, The Consolation of Philosophy, which is a long conversation between himself and his nurse, Philosophy. Through her advice and insight, she ultimately leads him back to health and indeed enlightenment. It's this work from which we'll gather our material. So with that said, let's dive right into his opinions on this very important, if not the most important, question we could pose ourselves. Passage number 1. This world would never have coalesced into one form out of such diverse and antagonistic parts had there not been one who could unify such diversity. The Consolation of Philosophy, Book 3, Chapter 12. The first of our couple passages sees Boethius commenting on how utterly chaotic the universe could have been, given the innumerable factors which go into such creation, but how ordered and harmonized it turned out instead. Our own planet, for example, it sits in a perfect placement related to the sun. Not too far, not too close. Earth could have ended up anywhere, but it was always destined to be exactly where it is. This could have only happened by intelligent design, and Boethius attributes this to God himself. To think of it in other terms, I imagine the randomness of our universe's creation without a divine source behind it as a large room filled with blank pages with a huge explosion of ink occurring. The globs of ink fly through the air and splatter on the blank pages in such perfected ways that they end up forming complete sentences in chronological order, writing the story of humankind and creating books upon books of material. It just seems unlikely. Passage number 2. I could never believe that events of such regularity are due to the haphazards of chance. In fact, I know that God the Creator watches over his creation. The day will never come that sees me abandon the truth of this belief. The Consolation of Philosophy, Book 1, Chapter 6. This quote furthers the first by ascribing all of the seemingly unrelated events of everyday life to one divine cause. Like our falling dominoes example, Boethius is convinced that all movements were caused by an initial unmoved mover. This passage can also be used for our fate versus free will discussion, but I think it makes more sense to add it here, as the philosopher clearly claims his belief in a creator and that he is, in fact, God himself. Alongside this, he also proposes the idea that God, the unmoved mover, indeed watches over his creation. That is, he orders their steps and plans for them an ultimate destiny that is ultimately good. To go back to our massive Rubik's Cube example, it's almost as if God has these perfected endings already designed, with every color on every surface matching up to the ones around it. And he makes sure that we don't get too far off course from being able to complete it by living out our lives and making the everyday choices we make. It's an extremely ethereal, delicate game of cause and effect, and one which I'll spend the rest of my life, no doubt, trying to truly understand. And with that, we come to the end of this episode with another philosopher giving their personal reasons for their believing in the existence of God. They're good ones too, as whether or not someone believes in God, they can always appreciate the majesty and complexity of our universe and how it all works together to provide a perfect situation for life, growth, and infinite wonders which couldn't have possibly happened, as Boethius puts it, haphazardly. Tomorrow we'll explore his thoughts on fate and free will, which are major themes of his writings, given the tragic nature of his situation while writing them. Until then, my prayers are for God to bless us all. Indeed. Take care. Fate or free will? According to Boethius. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and that's the topic of the night for this installment. The circumstances surrounding Boethius's imprisonment while awaiting his execution must have surely been a huge influence when writing about fate and free will. Let's look at a couple of passages which speak on this very theme as we try and come to some sort of conclusion when taking Boethius into consideration. Passage number 1. Each future thing is anticipated by the gaze of God, which bends it back and recalls it to the presence of its own manner of knowledge. It does not change, as you think, with alternate knowledge of now this and now that, but with one glance anticipates and embraces your changes in its constancy. God receives those present mode of knowledge and vision of all things, not from the issue of future things, but from his own immediacy. The Consolation of Philosophy, Book 5, Chapter 6. This sounds like such a beautiful passage, and one that I'm still trying to understand. What I'm getting from it, however, is that things that will be don't change with the flow of individual movement in relation to people's lives, such as, my saying this phrase will lead into the next phrase, though the next phrase was always meant to be said, regardless of me saying anything before it. That's probably as close to an explanation as I'll get when it comes to this specific quote. As I comprehend it, Boethius seems to be saying that regardless of our different choices, certain events are written in stone, and from God's point of view, they are all in the present sense. We'll probably come back to certain pieces of this passage as we continue to explore the themes of fate versus free will with other philosophers, who will undoubtedly shed more light on these words than I'm able to. Passage number 2. Take the case of those who believe that foreknowledge does not impose necessity upon the future, and that freedom of the will is not infringed by foreknowledge. I would like to know why you consider their reasoning ineffective. For the only source of your proof of the predestination of the future is your belief that what is foreknown cannot but happen. Therefore, if, as you were only just now saying, if foreknowledge does not impose any predestination on the future, why is it that acts of the will are forced to be predestined? But for the sake of argument, so that you may see what follows, let us say that there is no foreknowledge. In this case, actions of the will are not forced to be predestined, are they? Again, let us say that there is foreknowledge, but that it does not impose any predestination on things. The same freedom of the will remains, I think, absolute and uninfringed. The Consolation of Philosophy, Book 5, Chapter 4. This passage seems to be combining both fate and free will into one unified idea, which falls right in line with our studies into compatibilism. Philosophy, as Boethius's nurse, is saying that even if we know we're going to end this talk in the next few minutes, that doesn't take anything away from our very choice to do so in the first place. Just because we foresee certain events doesn't mean that we can't choose to go in a different direction, even if we ultimately don't do so. Another everyday example may be having the foreknowledge that we'll get off at a certain exit while driving on the freeway. It's still up to us as to whether or not we completely pass up the exit. We probably won't, but that still doesn't alter our free will regarding it. This is another one of those passages which we'll revisit in future talks on fate and free will, as we continue our deep discussion on compatibilism and the implications it has on our decisions and time itself. So with that, we'll begin wrapping this episode up and prepare for another theory as to why evil exists and what Boethius's stance is on the matter. He must have much to say on it, as he and philosophy speak of fortune quite a bit throughout the Consolation of Philosophy, as he ponders why fortune herself sometimes chooses the evil to shed her good graces upon, while ignoring the innocent. We'll pick it all back up tomorrow, but until then, my prayers are for God to bless us all. indeed. Take care. Why does evil exist? According to Boethius. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and that's our question we're posing the medieval philosopher for tonight's talk. It's a complex topic which we've tackled before with a few different people, but it'll be interesting to see what Boethius himself thinks about it, given his tragic story. So let's not waste any time and get right into our very first quote. When wickedness rules and flourishes, not only does virtue go unrewarded, it is even trodden underfoot by the wicked and punished in the place of crime. That this can happen in the realm of an omniscient and omnipotent God who wills only good is beyond perplexity and complaint. The Consolation of Philosophy, Book 4, Chapter 1. It's interesting to see such a brilliant mind being so humble in its estimation as to why evil exists, or that it even exists in the first place. This is Boethius posing a question which we've all asked ourselves at some point or another. That if God is all-seeing and all-powerful and only wants good for this world, how can he possibly allow evil to exist? While he doesn't exactly attempt to answer it, he does show his humanity by clearly pointing out his perplexity and complaint which he has with the issue. But what makes Boethius so perplexed in the first place? It's the fact that very often evil is rewarded while virtue is not. His further assessment that the good are even punished instead of those who truly deserve it is perhaps due to his personal situation of being accused for something he never did. This ultimately led to his untimely ending, but not before leaving behind his masterpiece. Passage number 2. And so, sovereign providence has often produced a remarkable effect. Evil men making other evil men good. For some, when they think they suffer injustice at the hands of the worst of men, burn with hatred for evil men, and being eager to be different from those they hate, have reformed and become virtuous. It is only the power of God to which evils may also be good, when by their proper use he elicits some good result. The Consolation of Philosophy, Book 4, Chapter 6. This is such an insightful thought, and one that we haven't really come across until now. I can completely see how the effect of having been slighted by a morally corrupt person can cause another to give up their evil ways and turn towards the light instead. When we are on the receiving end of insults or personal attacks, we often feel contempt towards the person who put us so down. To further ourselves from any type of similarity to them, we may reevaluate our own actions and see that we want to be nothing like them, bringing about what Boethius claims to be a good result. and possibly the only one we can see with the existence of evil. And so, that brings us to another close. We'll hopefully reach a better understanding of this question with each new philosopher we encounter. For now, though, we can rest assured that even if evil does exist in this world, there is much beauty as well, which is exactly what we'll be looking into tomorrow. Until then, my prayers are for God to bless us all. Indeed. Take care. What is beauty? According to Boethius. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and that's what we'll look into for tonight's installment. It's another different sort of episode, as we'll only look at one passage, though split into two sections, so that we may be able to closely evaluate each one. They'll sound contradictory at first, and perhaps are, but I think there's some type of cohesion within the quote that I haven't been able to truly find yet, but maybe analyzing them will bring me closer to understanding what Boethius was trying to say. So let's not waste any time and get right into the passage of the night. Perhaps your eyes are attracted by the way precious stones reflect the light. But if there is any special quality in this brilliance, it is in the light of the precious stones, not of men, so that I am astonished that men can admire them. The Consolation of Philosophy, Book 2, Chapter 5. These initial phrases speak on how the object of beauty itself is what should be praised, not the people's admiration of them. He goes on to almost ask, in nicer terms, how something so artless as man can appreciate art in the first place. It's like the person who stops to smell a rose and marvel at its simple beauty. Shouldn't that person be filled with some type of beauty themselves to be able to see it in another external thing? Boethius points out that humankind is too flawed to be able to appreciate true beauty in truly beautiful things. That's at least what these lines say to me. I disagree with them, as I believe humankind is full of beauty, and individual people represent the most beautiful creation ever conceived. But perhaps his situation of being wrongfully accused made him more cynical and pessimistic toward those types of things. So let's get into the second half of the passage. Surely, there is nothing devoid of life to give it movement and devoid of structure, which living, rational nature can justifiably consider beautiful. Such things may be works of the Creator, and may draw some minimal beauty from their own ornamental nature, but they are of an inferior rank to you as a more excellent creature, and cannot in any way merit your admiration. The Consolation of Philosophy, Book 2, Chapter 5. So this sees Boethius taking the opposite stance, which confounds the reader from the first statement that much more. And that is that humans are indeed the highest form of creation or beauty that there exists, and that they shouldn't feel the need to lower their appreciation to such things which are not of a living, organic nature. Though, of course, all is created by the Creator, there are levels of which we should be aware of. The precious stones from the first example don't compare to the inner workings of an eye or something which can actually behold the beauty which resonates in the precious stone in the first place. So what is beauty? Or which is more beautiful? The precious stone or the person who can see the beauty in it? I'm still trying to figure out what Boethius wants to say with these passages, but I'm hoping someone can open my eyes to their meaning someday. Until then, I'll just conclude that philosophy, as his nurse, was simply trying to open his own mind with examples which everyone can relate to. And of course, they worked, as his enlightenment wasn't too far off. And so, we'll begin wrapping this installment up and look forward to tomorrow's final question regarding the movement of time, before beginning with another personal favorite, Saint Anselm. I again, and always, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your continued support and the fact that you're still listening to what may sound like similar topics, but which all have very different viewpoints, as we've mentioned before. Until tomorrow, my prayers are for God to bless us all. Indeed. Take care. How does time move? According to Boethius. Welcome to the Summit Study Hall. I'm Dre, and that's what we'll be exploring in tonight's installment. Though Boethius doesn't speak much about the exact flow of time itself, as much as he does on fate versus free will, it's still an extremely interesting question to dive into. So let's not waste any time and get right into our first passage. But how absurd it is to say that the occurrence of temporal events is the cause of eternal prescience. Yet the opinion that God foresees the future because it is destined to happen is the same as believing that events of a single occurrence are the cause of that supreme providence. The Consolation of Philosophy, Book 5, Chapter 3. Here is Boethius protesting to his nurse, philosophy, about the idea of a future set in stone. That's at least what I gather from it. He willfully challenges the notion that just because there is such a thing as eternal prescience, from God's point of view, that does not directly make up for the cause of events in the first place. What I imagine Boethius as thinking here is that free will is, of course, still a valid and proper way of thinking about the course of time. Whether or not we decide to do anything is not because God foresaw it or that he knew of it, so it had to happen, but rather that it was always meant to happen, so he foresaw it so. It may sound like circular reasoning in a way, and perhaps it is. For now, though, let's look at the second half of this quote. Here, Boethius is examining the very idea we just spoke of. For God to foresee the future because it is destined to happen, as we previously established, means that there is, in fact, a future which is set in stone. This is why he goes on to say that thinking this way is similar to saying that things happen the way they do directly because of a divine foreknowledge, which I believe he dismisses in the first half of this passage. We'll definitely revisit this upon getting more clarification. Quote number 2. It cannot be that what is foreseen as a future event does not come to pass. It would be as if we believed that what Providence foreknows as future events is not going to happen. They were not predestined in their own nature. You will easily be able to see it in this way. We see many things before our eyes as they happen, like the actions we see charioteers performing in order to control and drive their chariots, and other things of this sort. But no necessity forces any of them to happen in this way, does it? The Consolation of Philosophy, Book 5, Chapter 4. Philosophy, as Boethius' nurse, responds to his objections of a fatalistic future by restating the importance of free will, which each of us have. However, if something is foreseen, then it is almost as if it's already happened. It cannot be that it does not happen. Therefore, foreseeable or not, the events we put into play haven't been pre-decided by that which foresaw them in the first place, but rather, as we previously mentioned, they are foreseen because they were meant to happen the way they played out based on our own decisions. So, how does time move? According to Boethius, it moves linearly toward a future which isn't exactly set in stone, as we still have a chance to change it from our perspectives, but which is still foreseen from God's perfect vantage point of all forms of time, past, present, and future. And with that, we wrap up another philosopher and their theories as we head into the final 2 medieval thinkers of Season 2. First will be St. Anselm, and lastly, Thomas Aquinas. After those 2, we'll finish out the season strong and begin preparing for our next one, which will feature all philosophers from the Renaissance. It should be extremely interesting, as we'll take them one by one as we did with our first 6. So with that, I just want to again thank you for your ongoing support and to say how much it all means to me. Until tomorrow, my prayers are for God to bless us all. Indeed. Take care.